How long have you worked at the National Weather Service office?
I've been out at the Shreveport office for over 22 years now.
22 years. What sort of summers throughout your life as a true Arklatex native really stand out to you?
You know, as we move through, especially 2010 and 2011, by far, that by far stands out to me as one of the most wildest but most significant hot, dry years that I've ever experienced in my lifetime.
So when we get to 2011, what really stands out to you the most about that summer and how hot it was?
Oh gosh, I mean, we were shattering records left and right. High temperature records, highest minimum temperature records, number of 100-degree days, number of 105-degree days, very little, if any, rainfall. Just a combination of, you know, those during the summer of 2011, which was only exacerbated from what had actually occurred from 2010 up through the summer of 2011 there. That just kind of made conditions ripe for the extreme heat and drought conditions that we experienced that year.
Okay, so let's try to put this in perspective. Over the course of a summer, how many days does Shreveport, on average, see where they get over to 100 degrees or hotter each year?
Yeah, we have records going back to 1874 here in Shreveport, and so if you average the records back, we typically run about 7 days per year where temperatures reach or exceed 100 degrees. However, if you go back and look through and average those same numbers back over the last 30 years since 1990, you'll see that we've actually increased that number, and we're averaging about 10 days per summer of 100-degree temperatures.
And if we're talking about, you know, just a normal hot summer where it's above average, how many days would you say that we usually see over 100 degrees?
Well, I mean, if we're just looking at averages, I mean, typically we're, again, averaging 7 to 10 at least. Some have more, some have less. But really, over these last 30 years, we've tend to average quite a bit more than the 10 that that if you run the averages over the last 30 years.
So if I told you we had a summer where we got 20 days of 100 degrees or hotter, how would you describe that summer?
Hot.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, very hot. I mean, a little atypical, but you know, it's not uncommon that we'll see 20 days where temperatures reach or exceed 100.
Now, how many days in 2011 did we get to 100 degrees or hotter?
63.
63 days.
63 days. I mean, you look at that perspective, 63 days, that's over 2 months worth where temperatures reached or exceeded 100-degree days. The previous record before that was 47 days set back in 1881. So we not only broke the record, we shattered it.
Shattered it. And how many days did we get to 105 or hotter?
In 2011, we reached 105 or hotter 18 times, 17 in August and 1 in September.
So just in the month of August alone, we had almost twice the amount of days where we got to 105 or hotter than what we averaged for 100-degree days for an entire summer.
Absolutely. In fact, during August of that year, we reached 100 degrees minimum 28 of those 31 days.
So if someone said, hey, you got to 28 100-degree days for an entire summer, that alone is really hot, not even considering when you're talking about that happens over a 1-month period.
Yes, absolutely.
How many records did we set for the summer and then just in the month of August?
Too many to count. I'm serious, too many to count. You look at daily records, you look at high minimum temperature records. We set numerous records there. We also set the records for the most number of 100-degree days, as well as 105+ degree days. I mean, there's just so many that you can factor in. There's just really too many to count. We were setting records left and right that year.
So what was really going on with the weather that makes that summer and then specifically that month of August so special? Because you talked about the 105-degree days. You said 17 of them were in the month of August alone.
Correct,
so this really peaked in August, but generally throughout the summer and then again peaking in August. What was going on with the weather that allowed that to happen that we haven't obviously seen since?
Yeah. What was interesting was 2010 was a hot and especially a very dry year here in Shreveport and really across much of the Arklatex. And so we actually experienced back-to-back La Nina events here across all of the Arklatex, and really the southern half of the United States was just inundated with record high temperatures and extreme and even exceptional drought. And so we ended up setting, in 2010, we ended up setting the 8th driest year on record with just over 30 inches of rain, okay? Now you factor that into 2011, and we actually averaged 16th driest year on record. And so the strong La Nina that we experienced there in 2010 continued from, say, the early summer months all the way through the end of the year up to about the late spring of 2011. It eased up just barely to end the event before starting again back in late spring, early summer of 2011, and that persisted really through the end of the year and into early 2012.
Yeah, I get that, and you know, obviously La Nina typically lends itself to drier, hotter conditions here across this part of the country. But what was the perfect storm? Obviously, it wasn't a storm, but what was the perfect storm of ingredients that came together that made August 2011 stand so far? And when we talk about the average temperatures, when you really kind of compare for record-wise, what makes, you know, almost like a secretariat type of month in terms of just separating itself from the pack? What really came together specifically for that month that just blew everything out of the water?
Well, I mean, there's several ingredients that came together for that record month. I mean, again, the persistent dryness that continued back through 2010, and which continued all the way through the summer of 2011. But also we had a semi-permanent upper level ridge of high pressure that was centered right over the southern plains and the Arklatex region. I mean, this ridge was so strong, it rarely moved, it just remained in place through much of the late spring, and especially the summer months. And so that just kept much below normal rainfall, and the ground continued to dry up. Soil moisture was basically non-existent during the summer of 2011. And so those ingredients, that you're drying up the ground, you're increasing the extent of the heat, the ground is able to hold these hotter temperatures because of the lack of soil moisture. It was just a combination of things that led to the ripe ingredients for the record heat that we experienced during the month of August.
All right, so that's when we talk about, you know, the numbers. As someone who lived through that month in terms of just daily life and activities, what do you remember of, you know, what that month basically did to the community and to people who had to live through, once again, 1,705 degree days, 16 daily record highs? How did people get through that? Because I'm interested to find, you know, we have these numbers, again, putting into perspective just how crazy it was, but obviously there's human impacts to this. So what was going on in the community at that time?
Impacts came from us in every direction imaginable that year. Not only are you dealing with the record heat, but you're also dealing with the record amounts of electricity having to be produced and distributed throughout the electrical grid. It was not all that uncommon to have portions of that grid fail during that summer. I myself lost power at my home numerous times because of that, blown transformers, everyone trying to stay cool. And it was just really extremely difficult to do that. I think especially parts of Texas were doing rolling brownouts, trying to conserve power because of the fact that again, everyone was trying to stay cool. You also had issues with water supply. Many rural communities running on wells, if they had the more shallow wells, those wells had dried up. And so only those that with much deeper wells were able to use water. I think there was even conservation measures in place for water, conserving water across much of the Arklatex. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe here even in Shreveport as well. For instance, a lot of the power generation at Toledo Bend Dam down in lower parts of Toledo Bend, the pool stage at Toledo Bend was so low that they were not able to produce electricity. And
wow.
so, yeah, so impacts were significant, from an electrical standpoint, from a water standpoint, also fire weather. We had numerous fires break out across all the Arklatex, some very, very large fires as well, most notably the Bear Creek fire, which developed in far southern Cass County, and which sent billows of dense smoke south across East Texas along and just west of the Louisiana line. Our office issued something we had never done before, a dense smoke advisory, because the smoke was so dense you could barely see, not even a mile out. Air quality was extremely poor because of the number of wildfires ongoing. In fact, if you take a stroll out on I-20 heading out of Shreveport towards Marshall, you can actually see some of the remnants of some of the charred and burned areas along the median and off to the sides of the road, because actually parts of I-20 was shut down because of wildfires that had sparked and had actually jumped the interstate. So, again, from an impact perspective, these were impacts that this area has never ever seen before and may not ever see again in our lifetime.
So it truly could be, that was maybe a once in a lifetime event. Kind of wrap it up. Well, I guess I want to ask you, so how did you try to beat the heat during that month? Obviously working, going home, how did you kind of contend with, obviously being a native here, used to being hot during the summer, but what did you do to stay cool during that month?
Gosh, staying indoors. When I was not at working, I was home just trying to stay cool, staying hydrated. And the times that I did have power, making the most of it. I limited my outdoor exposure to the heat. Any kind of yard work that I did either early in the morning or especially late in the afternoon, early evening. Something you got to keep in mind though too is, this area is typical of very humid summers. Now 2011, because it was so dry, virtually no soil moisture in place, the humidity levels were actually abnormally low that summer. We had dew points that were mixing down into the 50s and to near 60 degrees each day. Wow. So yes, it was kind of a drier heat, but this was heat that was more typical of what you'd find out in West Texas. Again, conditions were extreme, but again, it wasn't as bad as what is typical of this kind of summer, especially when you combine heat and humidity. Again, heat indices were not much higher than the ambient air temperatures each day. So that made conditions a little bit more tolerable.
So yeah, I guess how many excessive heat warnings were there?
Numerous. Okay. The National Weather Service has a set criteria for excessive heat warnings. Typically, when heat indices reach or exceed 105 or 110 degrees. 105 to 109 degrees is typical for a heat advisory, whereas excessive heat warnings is for basically 110 or greater. However, given the impacts that we're experiencing really from all angles, we issued numerous excessive heat warnings because, again, these were conditions that this area had not seen in our lifetime, and it could be a once-in-a-lifetime type event.
And I'll kind of wrap it up with this. Does it concern you, though, with the effects with climate change and things of that nature, that potentially we could see something like that maybe down the road, or something even worse than that, infamous month, again, the Secretariat month of heat for the region? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Again, even since 2011, we've had 3 additional years that have actually been warmer than 2011, believe it or not, and that being 2012, I think 2017, and 2018. So even in the 10 years since, we've had 3 other years that have actually been warmer than 2011 from an annual scale. The fact that because of climate change, we're not only seeing more intense heat and also drought, but we're also seeing more in the way of extreme weather, like tornadoes and severe thunderstorms, also flash floods. So it's not just the heat alone, but it's just we're receiving impacts from all other angles there as well, not just here, but all across the globe.
Yeah, and I guess one last question about that month. Was there any particular event that just is seared into your mind the most about that? Was that, the only time that you can remember the dense smoke advisory? I'm just wondering if there's any one particular event during that month or summer in general that's kind of seared into your memory.
Well, I mean, it was not only the dense smoke advisory. We're issuing, or some of our emergency managers that we partner with, they're county emergency managers, we were issuing fire warnings. This is something that National Weather Service offices will do, especially out there in parts of Texas and parts of the plains or so, when they're experiencing extreme fires that are encroaching in on communities, threatening life and property. That's something that we don't issue alone, but we're asked by our partners to issue those type of products. And so we did issue several fire warnings for communities that were threatened by wildfires during that summer month, in addition to the dense smoke advisories. Numerous heat advisories, excessive heat warnings, because it was because of the extreme event that we experienced, the number of impacts that we had, and especially the duration throughout that entire summer. I mean, we're already hitting 100-degree temperatures already in June, and even persisted all the way through late September. We hit 100 degrees on September 29th of that year, which tied for the latest 100-degree temperature ever recorded on record here in Shreveport. So I mean, all the way upwards to almost the start of October, we were still seeing the triple-digit heat. So the fact that the longevity, the impacts, everything, it's just easily etched in my mind from that summer. I spent several evenings when I lost power, it was too hot in the house, I just sat out in my truck listening to the radio in the air conditioning, because just trying to cool off, desperate times call for desperate measures. And so, again, so many memories from that event, having worked it and having experienced it, that I would care not to relive again.